Welcome to Conspiracy Stories, where we dive deep into the mysteries and conspiracies that have shaped our world. Today, we're uncovering the truth behind an event that changed the course of history, the Gulf of Tonkin Incident. In early August 1964, two incidents in the Gulf of Tonkin, off the coast of North Vietnam, led to the escalation of U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. But was everything as it seemed? Let's start with the facts. The origins of the Gulf of Tonkin incident are deeply rooted in the geopolitical context of the early 1960s, a period marked by intense Cold War tensions and the United States' growing involvement in Southeast Asia. The Vietnam War, a protracted conflict that would become one of the most contentious and divisive in American history, was beginning to escalate. The Gulf of Tonkin incident, which occurred in the summer of 1964, played a critical role in this escalation, providing the justification for a significant increase in U.S. military presence in Vietnam. In the years leading up to the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the United States had been steadily increasing its support for South Vietnam in its struggle against the communist forces of North Vietnam. The ideological conflict between communism and democracy was at the heart of the Cold War, and American leaders were determined to prevent the spread of communism in Southeast Asia, adhering to the domino theory. This theory posited that if one country fell to communism, neighboring countries would follow, leading to a regional and potentially global spread of communist influence. President John F. Kennedy had already sent military advisors to South Vietnam to assist in its fight against the Viet Cong, the communist insurgency operating in the South. However, after Kennedy's assassination in 1963, his successor, President Lyndon B. Johnson, faced increasing pressure to take more decisive action. Johnson inherited a complex and deteriorating situation in Vietnam, where the South Vietnamese government was struggling to maintain control, and the Viet Cong were gaining strength. By mid-1964, the situation in Vietnam had reached a critical point. The North Vietnamese were actively supporting the Viet Cong through the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a network of supply routes that extended through Laos and Cambodia into South Vietnam. The United States sought to disrupt these supply lines and weaken the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces. Covert operations, including surveillance and reconnaissance missions, were conducted in the Gulf of Tonkin to gather intelligence and apply pressure on North Vietnam. The Gulf of Tonkin, a body of water located off the coast of North Vietnam, became a focal point for these operations. The U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet, stationed in the Pacific, was tasked with conducting patrols and surveillance missions in the region. One of the key vessels involved in these missions was the USS Maddox, a destroyer equipped with advanced radar and sonar systems. On August 6, 1964, the USS Maddox was conducting a surveillance mission in international waters in the Gulf of Tonkin. The Maddox was part of a broader strategy known as Operation Plan 34A, which involved a series of covert raids and reconnaissance missions against North Vietnamese targets. These operations were designed to gather intelligence and provoke a response from North Vietnam. During its patrol, the USS Maddox reported being approached by 3 North Vietnamese torpedo boats. According to official reports, the Maddox fired warning shots, and the North Vietnamese boats responded with torpedo attacks. A brief naval engagement ensued, with the Maddox successfully evading the torpedoes and inflicting damage on the attacking boats. The Maddox reported minor damage from the engagement, but no American casualties were sustained. The first incident was relatively straightforward and documented, with clear evidence of an encounter between the USS Maddox and the North Vietnamese torpedo boats. However, it was the events of August 4, 1964, that would ignite controversy and have far-reaching implications. On this night, the USS Maddox, now accompanied by the USS Turner Joy, reported a second attack. The ships claimed to have detected multiple North Vietnamese torpedo boats on their radar and sonar, and they engaged in evasive maneuvers while firing at the perceived attackers. The second incident was markedly different from the first. The weather conditions were poor, with rough seas and low visibility, complicating the situation. The sailors on the Maddox and Turner Joy were on high alert, aware of the previous encounter and anticipating further action. Radar and sonar contacts were reported, suggesting the presence of enemy boats, and the crews responded by firing on these contacts. However, the reports from the second incident were confused and contradictory. Some radar and sonar contacts could not be definitively identified as enemy boats, and there were doubts about whether any actual torpedo attacks occurred. Despite the uncertainty, the commanders of the Maddox and Turner Joy reported the incident as an attack by North Vietnamese forces. These reports were relayed to Washington, where they were received with alarm. President Johnson and his advisors faced a critical decision. The reports of a second attack, whether accurate or not, provided a pretext for a more aggressive response to North Vietnam. Johnson, who was seeking a justification for escalating U.S. involvement in Vietnam, seized the opportunity. On August 5, 1964, he addressed the nation, stating that U.S. ships had been attacked in international waters and that the United States would respond to prevent further aggression. Johnson's address to the nation was a pivotal moment. He portrayed the Gulf of Tonkin incidents as unprovoked attacks by North Vietnamese forces on American ships, framing the situation as a clear act of aggression that required a strong response. His speech was designed to rally public and congressional support for a resolution that would grant him broad powers to conduct military operations in Vietnam. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, introduced in Congress shortly after Johnson's address, was met with overwhelming support. The resolution authorized the president to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. It effectively gave Johnson a blank check to escalate U.S. military involvement in Vietnam without requiring further congressional approval. The resolution passed with near-unanimous support in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, reflecting the sense of urgency and the belief in the necessity of responding to communist aggression. Only two senators, Wayne Morse of Oregon and Ernest Gruening of Alaska, voted against the resolution, voicing concerns about the lack of evidence and the potential for an open-ended commitment to war. With the passage of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, President Johnson had the authority he needed to escalate the U.S. military presence in Vietnam. Over the following months, American troop numbers in Vietnam increased dramatically, and the conflict escalated into a full-scale war. The resolution marked the beginning of a significant and controversial chapter in American history, one that would have profound consequences for the United States, Vietnam, and the world. In conclusion, the origins of the Gulf of Tonkin Incident are deeply entwined with the geopolitical dynamics of the Cold War and the United States' determination to prevent the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. The incidents in the Gulf of Tonkin provided the pretext for a significant escalation of U.S. involvement in Vietnam, leading to a protracted and contentious conflict. The events of August 4, 1964, and the subsequent passage of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution marked a turning point in American foreign policy and military strategy, setting the stage for one of the most divisive wars in American history. The legacy of the Gulf of Tonkin incident continues to resonate, serving as a cautionary tale about the complexities and consequences of wartime decision-making. The events of August 2, 1964, in the Gulf of Tonkin, involving the USS Maddox, are crucial to understanding the escalation of American involvement in Vietnam. This chapter delves into the details of that day, examining the actions and responses of both the U.S. Navy and the North Vietnamese forces, the immediate aftermath, and the broader implications of this initial encounter. The USS Maddox, a Navy destroyer, was conducting a routine intelligence-gathering mission in the Gulf of Tonkin, part of Operation Plan 34A. These operations were covert missions designed to gather intelligence on North Vietnamese coastal defenses and to provoke reactions from North Vietnamese forces. The Maddox was equipped with advanced radar and sonar technology, allowing it to monitor North Vietnamese movements and communications closely. On the morning of August 2nd, the Maddox was patrolling approximately 28 miles off the coast of North Vietnam in international waters. The ship's mission was to intercept and gather electronic intelligence, ELINT, on North Vietnamese radar installations and naval movements. This information was critical to U.S. strategic planning and to understanding the capabilities and intentions of North Vietnamese forces. At around 3 p.m. local time, the USS Maddox detected 3 North Vietnamese P-4 torpedo boats rapidly approaching from the northwest. These boats belonged to the North Vietnamese Navy's 135th Torpedo Squadron. The North Vietnamese, aware of the Maddox's presence and its surveillance activities, saw the destroyer as a direct threat to their coastal defenses and sovereignty. They were likely acting in response to recent South Vietnamese raids on North Vietnamese installations, part of the broader U.S. strategy to pressure the North. As the torpedo boats closed in, the Maddox's crew went to general quarters, preparing for a potential confrontation. Commander Herbert L. Ogier, the ship's commanding officer, ordered the Maddox to change course to avoid the incoming boats. Despite these maneuvers, the North Vietnamese boats continued to close the distance. At approximately 3:30 p.m., when the boats were within 10,000 yards, Commander Ogier ordered the Maddox to fire 3 warning shots to signal the North Vietnamese to alter their course. Instead of retreating, the North Vietnamese boats accelerated and launched their torpedoes at the Maddox. The Maddox responded with its 5-inch guns, targeting the torpedo boats. The engagement lasted about 20 minutes, during which the Maddox maneuvered to evade the torpedoes and continued to fire on the attacking boats. U.S. Navy aircraft from the nearby aircraft carrier USS Ticonderoga provided air support, strafing the torpedo boats and forcing them to retreat. The USS Maddox emerged from the skirmish largely unscathed, with only a single bullet hole from machine gun fire. In contrast, the North Vietnamese boats were significantly damaged, with at least one reported sunk and others limping back to port. The Maddox's crew, though shaken by the encounter, performed admirably under pressure, effectively defending their vessel. The immediate aftermath of the incident saw the U.S. Navy quickly relaying reports of the attack to higher command. These reports painted a clear picture of North Vietnamese aggression, with the Maddox having been attacked unprovoked in international waters. This narrative was swiftly communicated to Washington, where it reached the desks of President Lyndon B. Johnson and his top advisors. President Johnson and his administration faced a critical decision. The attack on the Maddox presented an opportunity to justify a stronger military response in Vietnam, aligning with their broader strategy of containing communism in Southeast Asia. However, they were also wary of the potential consequences of escalating the conflict without clear and incontrovertible evidence of North Vietnamese aggression. In the days following the attack, the Johnson administration debated the appropriate response. There was a desire to demonstrate resolve and strength, but also a recognition of the risks involved in escalating the U.S. military presence in Vietnam. As these discussions continued, another incident in the Gulf of Tonkin would soon force their hand. 2 days after the first encounter, on August 4th, the USS Maddox, now joined by the USS Turner Joy, reported another attack. This second incident, which occurred under less clear circumstances, involved radar and sonar contacts that suggested the presence of additional North Vietnamese torpedo boats. The Maddox and Turner Joy reported engaging these contacts with evasive maneuvers and return fire, although no physical evidence of enemy boats or wreckage was ever found. The second incident, shrouded in confusion and ambiguity, played a pivotal role in shaping the U.S. response. Despite the lack of clear evidence, the reports of a second attack were used to reinforce the narrative of North Vietnamese aggression. The Johnson administration seized on these events to push for a decisive response. On August 5th, President Johnson addressed the nation, stating that U.S. ships had been attacked in international waters and that the United States must respond to prevent further aggression. He portrayed the incidents as clear acts of North Vietnamese hostility, framing the situation in stark terms that demanded action. This address set the stage for the introduction of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution in Congress. The resolution authorized the president to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. It effectively granted Johnson the authority to escalate U.S. military involvement in Vietnam without requiring further congressional approval. The resolution passed overwhelmingly in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, reflecting the strong desire to support the president and to respond decisively to perceived threats. Only two senators, Wayne Morse of Oregon and Ernest Gruening of Alaska, voted against the resolution, voicing concerns about the lack of clear evidence and the potential for an open-ended commitment to war. With the passage of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, President Johnson had the mandate he needed to escalate the U.S. military presence in Vietnam. The number of American troops in Vietnam increased dramatically over the following months, and the conflict escalated into a full-scale war. The resolution marked a significant turning point, setting the stage for a protracted and contentious conflict that would last for another decade and have profound implications for American society and foreign policy. In conclusion, the events of August 2, 1964, in the Gulf of Tonkin, were a critical moment in the lead-up to the Vietnam War. The initial encounter between the USS Maddox and North Vietnamese torpedo boats provided the catalyst for the subsequent escalation of U.S. involvement in Vietnam. The first incident, while clearly documented, was followed by a second, more ambiguous encounter that played a pivotal role in shaping the U.S. response. The narrative of North Vietnamese aggression, reinforced by these incidents, justified the passage of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution and set the stage for a significant escalation of the conflict. The legacy of these events continues to resonate, highlighting the complexities and consequences of wartime decision-making and the importance of transparency and accountability in government actions that lead to war. The events of August 4, 1964, in the Gulf of Tonkin are among the most controversial and scrutinized incidents in American military history. The second reported attack on the USS Maddox and the USS Turner Joy has been the subject of intense debate and investigation, raising questions about the accuracy of the reports and the motives behind the U.S. response. This chapter delves deeply into the events of that fateful night, examining the evidence, the conflicting accounts, and the broader implications of the incident. On the night of August 4, 1964, the USS Maddox and the USS Turner Joy were patrolling the Gulf of Tonkin following the first incident 2 days earlier. The ships were on high alert, prepared for potential further engagements with North Vietnamese forces. The tension and anticipation among the crew members were palpable, given the recent skirmish and the heightened state of alert. The weather conditions that night were poor, with rough seas and heavy rain, which significantly reduced visibility. These challenging conditions contributed to the confusion and uncertainty that would characterize the events of the night. The ship's radar and sonar systems, crucial for detecting enemy vessels, were operating under less than ideal conditions, further complicating the situation. At approximately 9:30 p.m. local time, the radar operators aboard the Maddox and Turner Joy began to pick up what they believed to be multiple contacts moving towards them. These contacts were interpreted as North Vietnamese torpedo boats. The crews, already on edge from the previous encounter, quickly went to general quarters, preparing for an imminent attack. As the radar and sonar operators tracked the contacts, they reported erratic movements and intermittent signals, which contributed to the growing sense of urgency and danger. The ship's commanders, relying on these reports, ordered evasive maneuvers and prepared to engage the perceived threats. Over the next few hours, the Maddox and Turner Joy reported multiple high-speed maneuvers, torpedo launches, and evasive actions. The confusion and chaos of the night were compounded by the communications between the ships and their superiors. The radar and sonar contacts were reported up the chain of command, where they were interpreted as credible threats. The situation was further complicated by the lack of direct visual confirmation of enemy boats, with the reports based primarily on radar and sonar readings. Despite the lack of visual confirmation, the Maddox and Turner Joy fired upon the perceived targets, launching torpedoes and engaging in evasive maneuvers to avoid incoming attacks. The crews reported seeing flashes of light and hearing explosions, which they believed were evidence of torpedoes being launched and detonated nearby. However, no physical evidence of enemy boats or debris was ever found, raising significant doubts about the reality of the attack. In the immediate aftermath of the reported second attack, the ship's commanders and crew members were left with a sense of confusion and uncertainty. The radar and sonar readings that had indicated the presence of enemy boats were inconclusive, and the lack of visual confirmation or physical evidence further muddied the waters. Nevertheless, the reports were relayed to higher command as an attack by North Vietnamese forces, setting the stage for a decisive response. Back in Washington, the Johnson administration was quick to seize upon the reports of the second attack. President Lyndon B. Johnson and his top advisors were keenly aware of the strategic importance of the Gulf of Tonkin incidents and saw them as an opportunity to justify a stronger military response in Vietnam. Despite the ambiguities and uncertainties surrounding the second incident, the administration chose to present it as a clear act of aggression by North Vietnam. On August 5, 1964, President Johnson addressed the nation, stating that U.S. ships had been attacked in international waters and that the United States must respond to prevent further aggression. His address was carefully crafted to convey a sense of urgency and resolve, framing the incidents in stark terms that demanded action. Johnson portrayed the attacks as unprovoked and deliberate, emphasizing the need to defend American interests and deter further aggression. This address set the stage for the introduction of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution in Congress. The resolution, introduced shortly after Johnson's address, authorized the president to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. It effectively granted Johnson broad powers to escalate U.S. military involvement in Vietnam without requiring further congressional approval. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution passed overwhelmingly in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, reflecting the strong desire to support the president and respond decisively to perceived threats. Only two senators, Wayne Morse of Oregon and Ernest Gruening of Alaska, voted against the resolution, voicing concerns about the lack of clear evidence and the potential for an open-ended commitment to war. Their dissenting voices were drowned out by the overwhelming support for a robust response to the alleged attacks. With the passage of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, President Johnson had the mandate he needed to escalate the U.S. military presence in Vietnam. Over the following months, the number of American troops in Vietnam increased dramatically, and the conflict escalated into a full-scale war. The resolution marked a significant turning point, setting the stage for a protracted and contentious conflict that would last for another decade and have profound implications for American society and foreign policy. In the years following the Gulf of Tonkin incidents, questions and controversies surrounding the second attack persisted. Skeptics, both within the government and among the public, raised doubts about the accuracy of the reports and the motivations behind the U.S. response. The release of the Pentagon Papers in 1971, a classified government report on U.S. involvement in Vietnam, revealed significant doubts within the government about the veracity of the second attack. These documents showed that key officials had serious reservations about the reliability of the radar and sonar reports and believed that the attack might never have happened. Further fueling the controversy, declassified documents released by the National Security Agency, NSA, in 2005 provided strong evidence that the second Gulf of Tonkin incident was either exaggerated or misinterpreted. These documents included intercepted communications from the North Vietnamese, indicating that they did not engage U.S. ships on August 4, 1964. The declassified NSA documents raised serious questions about whether the Johnson administration used the incident as a pretext to escalate the war in Vietnam. In addition to the documentary evidence, witness testimonies from sailors and officers who were aboard the Maddox and Turner Joy on the night of August 4th provided further insight into the confusion and uncertainty of the incident. Many of these witnesses reported conflicting accounts of what they saw and heard, with some expressing doubts about whether they were actually under attack. The chaotic conditions, poor visibility, and erratic radar and sonar readings contributed to a sense of ambiguity, that has persisted for decades. The legacy of the Second Gulf of Tonkin Incident is one of controversy and suspicion. The incident played a pivotal role in justifying the escalation of U.S. involvement in Vietnam, leading to a conflict that would claim the lives of over 58,000 American soldiers and millions of Vietnamese civilians. The questions and doubts surrounding the second attack highlight the complexities and uncertainties of wartime decision-making and the potential for misinterpretation and misuse of intelligence. In conclusion, the events of August 4, 1964, in the Gulf of Tonkin remain among the most contentious and debated incidents in American military history. The second reported attack on the USS Maddox and the USS Turner Joy, characterized by confusion, poor visibility, and conflicting accounts, provided the pretext for the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution and the subsequent escalation of the Vietnam War. The lingering doubts and controversies surrounding the incident underscore the importance of transparency, accountability, and critical scrutiny in government actions that lead to war. The legacy of the Gulf of Tonkin incident serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of hasty decision-making and the need for rigorous evaluation of intelligence and evidence in the pursuit of national security. The aftermath of the Gulf of Tonkin incident was a turning point in American history, leading to the significant escalation of the Vietnam War and profoundly impacting U.S. foreign policy, public opinion, and the geopolitical landscape. This chapter explores the immediate and long-term consequences of the incident, the legislative and military actions that followed, the shifting public sentiment, and the lasting legacy of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. In the days and weeks following the Gulf of Tonkin incident, President Lyndon B. Johnson and his administration moved quickly to capitalize on the reports of the attacks on the USS Maddox and the USS Turner Joy. Johnson's decisive response was aimed at demonstrating American resolve and deterring further aggression by North Vietnam. His address to the nation on August 5, 1964, set the tone for the subsequent actions, emphasizing the need to protect U.S. forces and prevent further communist expansion in Southeast Asia. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, introduced in Congress shortly after Johnson's address, was a critical piece of legislation that would shape the future of U.S. involvement in Vietnam. The resolution authorized the president to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. This broad mandate effectively gave Johnson the authority to escalate the U.S. military presence in Vietnam without requiring further congressional approval. The resolution passed overwhelmingly in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, with only 2 dissenting votes in the Senate. Senators Wayne Morse of Oregon and Ernest Gruening of Alaska were the lone voices of opposition, expressing concerns about the lack of clear evidence and the potential for an open-ended commitment to war. Despite their objections, the resolution was approved by a wide margin, reflecting the strong desire to support the president and respond decisively to the perceived threat from North Vietnam. With the passage of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, President Johnson had the political backing he needed to escalate U.S. military operations in Vietnam. Over the next few months, the number of American troops in Vietnam increased dramatically. By the end of 1964, there were approximately 23,000 U.S. military personnel in Vietnam, up from around 16,000 at the beginning of the year. This number would continue to rise rapidly in the following years, reaching a peak of over 500,000 troops by 1968. The escalation of U.S. involvement in Vietnam was marked by a series of military campaigns aimed at weakening the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces. Operation Rolling Thunder, a sustained bombing campaign against North Vietnam, began in March 1965 and continued for more than 3 years. The goal of Operation Rolling Thunder was to destroy North Vietnamese infrastructure, disrupt supply lines, and diminish the enemy's capacity to wage war. However, the campaign also had significant collateral damage, causing widespread destruction and suffering among the civilian population. As U.S. military operations intensified, the war became increasingly costly and contentious. American casualties mounted, and the financial burden of the war grew. The Johnson administration faced mounting criticism for its handling of the conflict, with growing concerns about the effectiveness of U.S. military strategy and the lack of a clear path to victory. The initial public support for the war began to wane as the human and economic costs became more apparent. The Vietnam War also had a profound impact on American society. The draft, which compelled young men to serve in the military, became a source of significant tension and protest. Anti-war demonstrations grew in size and intensity, with activists from diverse backgrounds coming together to demand an end to the conflict. College campuses became hotbeds of anti-war sentiment, and the media played a crucial role in shaping public perception of the war. The Tet Offensive, launched by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces in January 1968, was a pivotal moment in the conflict. The coordinated attacks on multiple cities and military bases in South Vietnam caught the U.S. and South Vietnamese forces by surprise. Although the Tet Offensive ultimately failed to achieve its strategic objectives, it had a profound psychological impact on the American public and policymakers. The scale and intensity of the attack shattered the perception that the U.S. was winning the war and led to a significant shift in public opinion. In the wake of the Tet Offensive, calls for de-escalation and a negotiated settlement grew louder. President Johnson, facing increasing opposition and a deeply divided nation, announced in March 1968 that he would not seek re-election. His decision was a recognition of the profound challenges and controversies surrounding the Vietnam War. The election of Richard Nixon in 1968 marked a new phase in U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Nixon campaigned on a platform of peace with honor, promising to end the war while preserving U.S. credibility and achieving a favorable outcome. His administration pursued a policy of Vietnamization, which aimed to gradually transfer responsibility for the war to South Vietnamese forces while reducing the U.S. military presence. Despite these efforts, the war continued for several more years, with significant fighting and casualties on both sides. The eventual withdrawal of U.S. forces and the fall of Saigon in 1975 marked the end of the Vietnam War. The conflict had a lasting impact on American society, politics, and foreign policy. The war left deep scars on the national psyche, fostering a sense of disillusionment and mistrust towards the government. The experience of Vietnam also led to significant changes in U.S. military and foreign policy, including the implementation of the War Powers Act in 1973, which aimed to limit the president's ability to commit U.S. forces to armed conflict without congressional approval. The Gulf of Tonkin Incident and the subsequent resolution have been the subject of extensive analysis and debate. Declassified documents and witness testimonies have raised significant doubts about the accuracy of the reports and the motivations behind the U.S. response. The release of the Pentagon Papers in 1971, a classified government report on U.S. involvement in Vietnam, revealed that key officials had serious reservations about the veracity of the second attack and the broader conduct of the war. Further fueling the controversy, declassified National Security Agency (NSA) documents released in 2005 provided strong evidence that the second Gulf of Tonkin incident was either exaggerated or misinterpreted. These documents included intercepted communications from the North Vietnamese, indicating that they did not engage U.S. ships on August 4, 1964. The declassified NSA documents raised serious questions about whether the Johnson administration used the incident as a pretext to escalate the war in Vietnam. In addition to the documentary evidence, witness testimonies from sailors and officers who were aboard the Maddox and Turner Joy on the night of August 4th provided further insight into the confusion and uncertainty of the incident. Many of these witnesses reported conflicting accounts of what they saw and heard, with some expressing doubts about whether they were actually under attack. The chaotic conditions, poor visibility, and erratic radar and sonar readings contributed to a sense of ambiguity that has persisted for decades. The legacy of the Gulf of Tonkin incident and the Vietnam War continues to influence American foreign policy and public opinion. The war is often cited as a cautionary tale about the dangers of hasty decision-making and the need for rigorous evaluation of intelligence and evidence in the pursuit of national security. The lessons learned from the Gulf of Tonkin Incident and the Vietnam War have shaped subsequent U.S. military engagements, including the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. In conclusion, the aftermath of the Gulf of Tonkin Incident was a turning point in American history, leading to the significant escalation of the Vietnam War and profoundly impacting U.S. foreign policy, public opinion, and the geopolitical landscape. The immediate response to the incident, marked by the passage of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, set the stage for a protracted and contentious conflict that would last for another decade and have profound implications for American society and foreign policy. The legacy of the Gulf of Tonkin incident continues to resonate, serving as a cautionary tale about the complexities and consequences of wartime decision-making and the importance of transparency and accountability in government actions that lead to war. The lessons learned from the Gulf of Tonkin incident and the Vietnam War remain relevant today, highlighting the necessity of vigilance in protecting the rights and welfare of research participants and promoting trust in medical research and healthcare institutions. The Gulf of Tonkin incident, particularly the events of August 4, 1964, has long been surrounded by questions and controversies that have continued to fuel debate among historians, policymakers, and the public. The ambiguity and conflicting accounts of the incident have raised serious doubts about the accuracy of the reports and the motivations behind the U.S. response. This chapter delves into the various aspects of these controversies, examining the evidence, the conflicting testimonies, and the broader implications of the incident. The initial reports of the Gulf of Tonkin incident on August 2, 1964, involving the USS Maddox, were relatively straightforward and well documented. However, the second incident on August 4th, involving both the Maddox and the USS Turner Joy, quickly became a focal point of controversy. On that night, the radar operators aboard the Maddox and Turner Joy detected what they believed to be multiple contacts moving towards them, interpreted as North Vietnamese torpedo boats. The ships engaged in evasive maneuvers and reported firing at the perceived attackers. Despite these reports, no physical evidence of enemy boats or debris was found, leading to significant doubts about the reality of the attack. One of the primary sources of controversy is the reliability of the radar and sonar readings reported by the Maddox and Turner Joy. The weather conditions on the night of August 4th were poor, with rough seas and heavy rain reducing visibility and complicating the interpretation of radar and sonar signals. The radar and sonar operators reported erratic movements and intermittent signals, which contributed to the confusion and the perception of an imminent threat. These conditions made it difficult to distinguish between actual enemy vessels and false readings caused by weather interference or other anomalies. Adding to the complexity, the chaotic and high-pressure environment aboard the ships may have influenced the interpretation of the data. The crews were already on edge from the previous encounter on August 2nd and were operating under the assumption that another attack was possible. This heightened state of alert likely affected their judgment and decision-making, leading them to interpret ambiguous signals as evidence of enemy action. The absence of direct visual confirmation of enemy boats further compounded the uncertainty, as the crews relied primarily on the radar and sonar reports. In the aftermath of the reported second attack, conflicting accounts and inconsistencies began to emerge. Some crew members expressed doubts about whether they were actually under attack, citing the lack of visual confirmation and the erratic nature of the radar and sonar contacts. These conflicting testimonies have fueled ongoing debates about the accuracy of the reports and the legitimacy of the U.S. response. The discrepancies in the accounts have led some to question whether the incident was the result of genuine misinterpretation or a deliberate fabrication to justify escalation. The Johnson administration's response to the incident has also been a major point of contention. President Lyndon B. Johnson and his top advisors quickly seized upon the reports of the second attack to push for a stronger military response in Vietnam. Despite the ambiguities and uncertainties surrounding the incident, Johnson presented it to the American public and Congress as a clear act of aggression by North Vietnam. His address to the nation on August 5, 1964, emphasized the need to protect U.S. forces and prevent further communist expansion in Southeast Asia. This narrative was instrumental in securing the passage of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which granted Johnson broad authority to escalate U.S. military involvement in Vietnam. The resolution passed overwhelmingly in Congress, with only 2 dissenting votes in the Senate. The strong support for the resolution reflected a widespread desire to support the president and respond decisively to the perceived threat. However, the lack of clear evidence and the haste with which the resolution was passed have raised questions about whether Congress fully understood the implications of their decision. The release of the Pentagon Papers in 1971 added fuel to the controversy. The Pentagon Papers, a classified government report on U.S. involvement in Vietnam, revealed that key officials had serious reservations about the veracity of the second attack. The document showed that senior military and civilian leaders were aware of the ambiguities and conflicting reports but chose to present a unified and unambiguous narrative to the public and Congress. This revelation exposed the extent to which the government had misled the public about the events and the broader conduct of the war. Further complicating the narrative, declassified National Security Agency, NSA, documents released in 2005 provided strong evidence that the second Gulf of Tonkin incident was either exaggerated or misinterpreted. These documents included intercepted communications from the North Vietnamese, indicating that they did not engage U.S. ships on August 4, 1964. The declassified NSA documents raised serious questions about whether the Johnson administration used the incident as a pretext to escalate the war in Vietnam. The conflicting accounts and evidence have led some historians and analysts to argue that the second Gulf of Tonkin incident was a case of miscommunication and miscalculation, where genuine mistakes and misinterpretations were amplified by the pressure to respond decisively. Others suggest that the incident was a deliberate fabrication, or at least an opportunistic use of ambiguous events to justify a predetermined policy of escalation. This debate continues to be a central point of contention in the historical analysis of the Vietnam War. The broader implications of the Gulf of Tonkin incident and the subsequent escalation of the Vietnam War have had a lasting impact on American politics and foreign policy. The incident and its aftermath exposed the dangers of unchecked executive authority and the importance of rigorous oversight and accountability. The War Powers Act of 1973, passed in response to the Vietnam War, aimed to limit the president's ability to commit U.S. forces to armed conflict without congressional approval. This legislation was designed to prevent future presidents from engaging in unilateral military actions without adequate oversight and accountability. The erosion of public trust in government during the Vietnam War era has had long-lasting effects on American society. The discrepancies and uncertainties surrounding the Gulf of Tonkin incident, coupled with the revelations of the Pentagon Papers, eroded public confidence in the government's honesty and integrity. This mistrust was further compounded by other scandals and controversies, such as the Watergate scandal, which led to the resignation of President Nixon in 1974. The cumulative effect of these events fostered a climate of suspicion and disillusionment that continues to influence American politics today. The Vietnam War and the Gulf of Tonkin incident also had significant implications for U.S. relations with other countries. The war strained America's alliances and damaged its reputation on the global stage. Many countries viewed the U.S. involvement in Vietnam as an act of imperialism and questioned the legitimacy of its actions. The war also fueled anti-American sentiment in many parts of the world, contributing to a perception of the United States as a global aggressor. The lessons learned from the Gulf of Tonkin incident and the Vietnam War have shaped subsequent U.S. military engagements, including the wars in Iraq, and Afghanistan. These conflicts have prompted debates about the use of military force, the importance of accurate intelligence, and the need for clear objectives and exit strategies. The experience of Vietnam has underscored the importance of critical scrutiny and accountability in government decisions that lead to war. In recent years, there have been renewed calls for transparency and accountability regarding the Gulf of Tonkin Incident and other historical injustices in U.S. foreign policy. Advocacy groups and human rights organizations have pushed for the declassification of remaining documents and for a full accounting of the events that led to the escalation of the Vietnam War. These efforts reflect a broader movement towards greater government transparency and the protection of civil liberties in the face of security concerns. The legacy of the Gulf of Tonkin incident continues to resonate today, serving as a powerful reminder of the complexities and consequences of wartime decision-making. The incident highlights the importance of transparency, accountability, and rigorous evaluation of intelligence and evidence in the pursuit of national security. It also underscores the need for careful consideration of the human and ethical implications of military actions. In conclusion, the questions and controversies surrounding the Gulf of Tonkin incident are a testament to the complexities and ambiguities of wartime decision-making. The conflicting accounts, the lack of clear evidence, and the subsequent revelations of government misrepresentation have fueled ongoing debates about the legitimacy of the U.S. response and the broader implications for American foreign policy. The legacy of the Gulf of Tonkin incident serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of hasty decision-making, the importance of transparency and accountability, and the need for critical scrutiny and rigorous evaluation in matters of war and peace. The Gulf of Tonkin incident and the subsequent escalation of the Vietnam War had far-reaching and profound impacts that extended well beyond the immediate events of 1964. These impacts reverberated through American society, politics, foreign policy, and military strategy, leaving a lasting legacy that continues to influence the United States and the world today. This chapter explores these broad and enduring effects, examining how the incident shaped public trust, military engagements, government accountability, and international relations. One of the most significant impacts of the Gulf of Tonkin incident was the profound erosion of public trust in the U.S. government. The initial narrative of unprovoked attacks on U.S. naval vessels, used to justify the escalation of military involvement in Vietnam, was later called into question by conflicting accounts and declassified documents. The Pentagon Papers, released in 1971, revealed that the Johnson administration had misled the public and Congress about the nature and extent of the attacks, raising serious questions about government transparency and integrity. This breach of trust had a lasting effect on American society, fostering a climate of skepticism and cynicism towards government institutions and officials. Other events and scandals during the Vietnam War era compounded the erosion of trust. The Watergate scandal, which led to President Richard Nixon's resignation in 1974, exposed significant abuses of power and further undermined public confidence in government. Together, these events contributed to a widespread perception of government dishonesty and corruption, shaping the political landscape for decades to come. The legacy of mistrust has influenced subsequent political movements and debates, emphasizing the importance of accountability and transparency in governance. The Vietnam War also had a profound impact on American foreign policy and military strategy. The war exposed the limitations of American military power and the challenges of fighting a protracted conflict in a foreign land. The concept of limited war, which aimed to contain communism without provoking a broader conflict with the Soviet Union or China, proved difficult to implement in practice. The complexities of guerrilla warfare, the resilience of the Viet Cong, and the challenges of securing popular support in South Vietnam highlighted the difficulties of achieving strategic objectives in such conflicts. The experience of Vietnam led to significant changes in U.S. military doctrine and strategy. The Powell Doctrine, named after General Colin Powell, emerged as a response to the lessons of Vietnam. This doctrine emphasized the importance of clear objectives, overwhelming force, and public and political support before committing U.S. military forces to conflict. The Powell Doctrine has influenced U.S. military engagement since the Vietnam War, including the Gulf War in 1991 and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The War Powers Act of 1973 was another significant legislative response to the Vietnam War and the Gulf of Tonkin Incident. This act aimed to limit the president's ability to commit U.S. forces to armed conflict without congressional approval. It required the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of deploying military forces and limited the duration of such deployments to 60 days unless Congress authorized an extension. The War Powers Act was designed to prevent future presidents from engaging in unilateral military actions without adequate oversight and accountability, reflecting the lessons learned from the unchecked executive authority during the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War also had significant social and cultural impacts on American society. The draft, which compelled young men to serve in the military, became a source of significant tension and protest. The anti-war movement grew in size and intensity, bringing together activists from diverse backgrounds to demand an end to the conflict. College campuses became hotbeds of anti-war sentiment, and the media played a crucial role in shaping public perception of the war. Iconic events, such as the Kent State shootings in 1970, where National Guard troops fired on student protesters, killing 4 and wounding 9, became symbols of the deep divisions and turmoil of the era. The Vietnam War also had a lasting impact on the lives of veterans and their families. Many returning soldiers faced significant challenges, including physical and psychological trauma, difficulty reintegrating into civilian life, and a lack of adequate support and recognition for their service. The war's divisive nature meant that many veterans did not receive the same level of respect and gratitude as those who served in previous conflicts, leading to feelings of isolation and neglect. The experiences of Vietnam veterans contributed to a growing awareness of the need for better support and services for those who serve in the military, influencing subsequent policies and programs. The impact of the Gulf of Tonkin Incident and the Vietnam War extended beyond the United States, affecting international relations and the global perception of American power. The war strained America's alliances and damaged its reputation on the global stage. Many countries viewed the U.S. involvement in Vietnam as an act of imperialism and questioned the legitimacy of its actions. The war also fueled anti-American sentiment in many parts of the world, contributing to a perception of the United States as a global aggressor. These perceptions have influenced international relations and diplomatic efforts in the decades since, shaping the context for American foreign policy. The Vietnam War also had significant implications for the Cold War dynamics between the United States and the Soviet Union. The war highlighted the limitations of military intervention as a tool for containing communism and underscored the need for more nuanced and flexible approaches to international conflict. The eventual withdrawal of U.S. forces from Vietnam and the subsequent fall of Saigon in 1975 were seen as significant setbacks for American efforts to counter Soviet influence, leading to a re-evaluation of Cold War strategies and priorities. The lessons learned from the Vietnam War have continued to influence U.S. military and foreign policy in the 21st century. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have prompted debates about the use of military force, the importance of accurate intelligence, and the need for clear objectives and exit strategies. The experience of Vietnam has underscored the importance of critical scrutiny and accountability in government decisions that lead to war, emphasizing the need for a careful and measured approach to military engagements. In recent years, there have been renewed calls for transparency and accountability regarding the Gulf of Tonkin Incident and other historical injustices in U.S. foreign policy. Advocacy groups and human rights organizations have pushed for the declassification of remaining documents and for a full accounting of the events that led to the escalation of the Vietnam War. These efforts reflect a broader movement towards greater government transparency and protecting civil liberties in the face of security concerns. The legacy of the Gulf of Tonkin incident continues to resonate today, serving as a powerful reminder of the complexities and consequences of wartime decision-making. The incident highlights the importance of transparency, accountability, and rigorous evaluation of intelligence and evidence in the pursuit of national security. It also underscores the need for careful consideration of the human and ethical implications of military actions. In conclusion, the impact of the Gulf of Tonkin incident and the Vietnam War is profound and far-reaching, influencing American society, politics, foreign policy, and military strategy for decades. The erosion of public trust in government, the changes in military doctrine and strategy, the social and cultural upheaval, and the international implications all reflect the lasting legacy of this pivotal moment in history. The lessons learned from the Gulf of Tonkin incident and the Vietnam War continue to be relevant today, emphasizing the importance of transparency, accountability, and critical scrutiny in matters of war and peace. The incident serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of hasty decision-making, the need for accurate and reliable intelligence, and the importance of a measured and thoughtful approach to military engagements. The Gulf of Tonkin incident remains a pivotal moment in American history, one that led to a significant escalation of the Vietnam War and left an indelible mark on the nation. As we reflect on this event, we are reminded of the importance of questioning official narratives and seeking the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more deep dives into history's most intriguing mysteries. Until next time, stay curious and keep questioning.